Okay, magandang araw po sa lahat. I am Rita Tagalog. I'll be sharing with you today the topic on integration of cultural icons in the lesson plan. It is my pleasure to be invited by PSEP to talk about this topic. And I appreciate the organizer as well as the participants for really spending their time on learning culture-based education. Okay. But before we go into that, let me walk you through, for those who are not aware of uh, cultural icons, on how cultural icons came about. Okay, the Philippine Culture Education Program, or PSEP, a cultural project of National Commission on Culture and Arts, or NCCA, established the Sagisag Kultura ng Pilipinas with the aim to gather, select, and promote the cultural icons of the country by creating a database and registry of the symbols of the Philippine culture. This is in response to the K-12 basic education curriculum by advocating a culture-based education and Filipino as the language of instruction with a revision in curriculum, preparation of teaching guides and model lesson plans, and teacher training. A while ago, Sir Dr. Joseph Cristobal mentioned about the importance of culture-based education and that it must be implemented in the basic education or in our educational system. Also, Dr. Alan de Guzman, a while ago, mentioned on the pedagogy, the importance of the pedagogy in culture-based education, of which he emphasized the use of rhizomatic pedagogy, indicating thematic pedagogy and the pedagogy of inquiry. My talk today would be dwelling on how to integrate cultural icons in the lesson plans. A group of experts reviewed the Sagisag Kultura ng Pilipinas and finalized 800 priority icons in 2011 and came up with the following characteristics and traits. No? So they have identified cultural icons as follows: include people and heroes who are natural born Filipino citizens with important traits vital to the country's progress and serve as good role model to Filipino youth. It also includes items of heritage, which must be more than 50 years old, native of indigenous and or important in national history. And it also includes historical sites, native flora and fauna, inventions, researches, or products of Filipino imagination and intelligence, which can be or which we can be proud of as Filipinos. So to put these cultural icons in context, we now ask the following question: how can these tools be used to promote achievement of desired learning outcomes? Now, I coined the term cultural icons as technological tools because basically, if we want to implement culture-based education, we will be utilizing or integrating the approved cultural icons that represents our country symbols. So the focus now for teachers is how can we make use of these tools to promote achievement of desired learning outcomes under the culture-based education paradigm. There are two ways of integrating technological tools or the cultural icons, no? So it's up to the teacher to choose which one. The first one is through instructional design models, of which it discusses or it presents the entire process of the teaching learning concepts. In here, we can see as teacher what particular phase or stage we integrate these cultural icons. So instructional design models provide guidelines to organize appropriate pedagogical scenarios to achieve instructional goals. On the other hand, we have also the option to integrate cultural icons in a technology integration models. This is now focused on the integration or the utilization of technology in a particular process or in a particular teaching learning process. No? So this model provides guidelines in the use of technology tools to enhance the learning of a content area or in multidisciplinary setting. So we will discuss this on how to apply this one, integrating the cultural icons of the Philippines. There are a good number of instructional designs that you can find in the literature, but I have carefully chosen 4 models that would be used in integrating or that could be analyzed. The processes can be analyzed and integrate in where can we integrate cultural icons as technological tools in the culture-based education. The first instructional model is what we call the Ed.D model. The Ed.D model is a framework in designing educational program, and it consists 5 stages. No, the Ed.D represents analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. As a process, this looks into the following: what are the characteristics, learning outcomes, learning needs of the learners, because this will serve as guide in designing or formulating our learning outcomes. So after the analysis, we go to the stage 2, which is design, wherein in here we identify what is the expected outcomes or learning outcomes to be used, what learning content to provide, and what instructional tools or what we call the cultural icons that we can integrate in the delivery of instruction. After designing those components, we now move on to the next stage, which is the development stage. In here, this is now the production and testing of all the things we have identified in the 2 stages. Okay, so this is now what we call the put in action. So in here, we can see, we can now use the identified cultural icons that would match or that was aligned with the learning outcomes we designed for the learners. After the development stage, we move on to the implementation stage. This stage reflects the continuous modification of the learning experiences. It does not mean that because we are done designing them and we are done with the analysis, we are also done in the implementation. As a learning process, it is a dynamic and continuous process. And thus, in the implementation, we now look into how far we have utilized what we have identified in the previous stages. And the last but not the least stage of the Ed.D model is the evaluation stage. This stage is now to test whether what we have done as a process has been effective or not, particularly in the integration of the cultural icons. So in here, we identify the what, the how, the why of the things that we have accomplished so far in the learning process. So it is a choice for the teacher whether he is or she is comfortable using this type of instructional design where he can integrate the cultural icons or what we call the technological tools, no, in the delivery of culture-based education. The second design model that I find also very important in the integration of cultural icons or instructional tools is the model of Gagne's 9-step of instruction. Gagne's 9-step of instruction is mentioned, it's a good one because it gives or it provides teachers the more opportunities to utilize the cultural icons or the technological tools. If you have to look into the 9 steps of effective teaching learning process, the first step is gaining attention. When we gain attention, we solicit motivation and interest from the students. And one of the simplest way of soliciting those interest and motivation is the utilization of games. If we can utilize our national games, for example, then students can easily relate and can easily set the mood of learning. No? It depends, of course, on what particular learning outcomes we are designing of. So in here, the first one is to gain attention. So the teachers could use either the singing, the games, or the storytelling. Next stage is to provide learning objectives. So just like identifying learning outcomes, learning objectives and outcomes are important component in the succeeding processes or stages each instructional design models has. No? So after identification of the learning outcomes, we'll now move to the stimulation or recall of the prior knowledge. So from gaining attention, wherein we can utilize or integrate the different cultural icons, we can also move now to stimulating recall or prior knowledge. A good example of utilizing cultural icons is our basketball games, wherein you can throw balls to the students, not necessarily the big ones, but just a small one. And then whoever catches the ball will now say something or recall what has been discussed in the previous meetings, or what the student or the learner learned, no, during the previous meeting. So we have already two opportunities. Then the fourth one is to present the material. Presenting the material is, of course, presenting the cultural icons or the technological tool. So in here, we identified the appropriate cultural icons that would match, or that is being mapped, or that is being aligned with the identified learning outcomes at the same time that is appropriate for the student's level. No? So those are important things we need to consider when we integrate cultural icons. Followed by the provide guidance and learning, and wherein we provide practice for students for mastery. Then we solicit or elicit performance, and we provide feedback, assess the performance, and of course, if we find that the students have mastered the skills, then we can now move on into enhanced retention and transfer. So those are the 9 steps of instruction if we want to use Gagne's model integrating cultural icons. The next model is what we call the Murals principle of instruction. This model consists of the 5 core principles that center on task-based learning. Murrell suggested that truly effective learning experiences are rooted in problem solving. So just like what has been emphasized by Dr. Alan a while ago, that one important pedagogy is the pedagogy of inquiry. In here, it is pedagogy. Merrill's principle is emphasizing on pedagogy on problem solving. So it's more on the construction of knowledge based on the problems given to the students at hand. Now, the principle consists 4 stages. The first stage is the demonstration, or what we call demonstrate, wherein learners are able to absorb the information more effectively when they see a prime example. So I would like to use, for example, that subject on health, health and science, health or science subject, and then the topic would be on nutritious food, or nutritious food. Um, a specific example is adobo. I know if you eat too much adobo, it can cause high blood pressure. But for purposes of a discussion, we use adobo. So in here, we can show the students the adobo as food, no? And that's our cultural icon. The second stage is to apply. In here, the information and skills they have learned will be applied, and this comes in the form of interactive problem solving and task performance. So in the application, students here will now be asked, what are the ingredients, or based on their observation of or the taste of the adobo, what could be the possible ingredients, no? Before informing or discussing the entire process of making adobo. Okay. The third stage is integrate. The integration of principle pertains to meaning and context. No? So in here, we integrate the newfound skills or knowledge into the daily lives. So we can now, for example, ask the students to try out if they are if the if the students are big enough to do that, then try to look into how uh, what are the tips or what are the tricks in cooking adobo to make it more delicious and healthy. Then the last stage is the activation, wherein the activation or the engagement, wherein students are now exposed to task-centric learning. No? So in here, they are not only doing or utilizing what they have learned on their own, but at the same time um, engaging or transferring their knowledge in the community. So, for example, one way of doing this with the adobo is to look into research or survey other regions on how they cook adobo and what could be some of the differences. So this is an example of the principles used by Mirel. No? So if we have to choose a particular cultural icon, then we need to identify whether this type of design model is applicable. The next model is what we call a sure model. I'm sure most of the teachers attending right now are familiar with the Azure, no? Because this has been used in educational technology. But because we are considering cultural icons also as technological tools, cultural technological tools that aid or serve as support in the teaching and learning process, then might as well look into this model. The model has 6 stages, no? And the assure represents or has its meaning. So we have letter A, just like other instructional designs, they begin with analysis of the learner's characteristics. This is a very important component before we can design teaching learning and before we can choose, select, or utilize cultural icon as technological tool. We need to identify, we need to understand who are the learners. And that was also emphasized by Dr. Alan de Guzman a while ago. Followed by the next stage, which is state the objective. So just like the other instructional designs, we need to identify what is expected of the students to learn. So what are the learning outcomes? Then after which, we select, modify, or design materials. So in here, we can now choose, select, choose, appropriate, and use cultural icons as technological tools in the teaching learning process. Then we utilize the materials, we require learners' response, and then we evaluate. So they may have 6 stages in this instructional design, but you can see that in the selection and the utilization of materials, these 2 stages play an important role in our understanding of the different cultural icons of the Philippines. We need to know what are they, how to use them, what are its historical functions, so that we can align them, we can map them to the entire learning process which teachers designed for instruction. So those are four instructional models that I would like to share on how to integrate, to look into the different stages on how to integrate cultural icons in that system. If you are a teacher who specify on the utilization of technology and choose the model that is specific to that particular process, then I would suggest you utilize the what we call the technology integration model or the TPAC model. I'm sure the ones, the teachers in Ed and other private schools are familiar with the TPAC model. Okay, as you can see in the image, we have there three circles overlapping with each other. No, so according to this model, which was developed by Mishra and Kohler in 2006, it is designed around the idea that the content or what you teach and the pedagogy, how you teach, must be the basis for the technology that you plan to use. Okay, so the content and the pedagogy drive the selection and utilization of the appropriate cultural icons to be integrated. Okay, in here in PCK, or what we call pedagogical content knowledge, this refers to the specialized knowledge of the teachers that allows them to use the most effective method for teaching specific content. No? So a teacher must have the PCK, or the pedagogical content knowledge. Second, according to this model, the teacher must also have the technological pedagogical knowledge, which means that for you to identify how to integrate, to choose, and utilize appropriate cultural icons or technological tools, you need to be knowledgeable, skillful in the different technological aspect in teaching. Okay, and we call it technological pedagogical knowledge. The third knowledge that a teacher must possess is what we call technological content knowledge. This is a set of skills which teachers acquire to help identify the best technologies to support their students as they learn the content. I've mentioned a while ago that it is very important to explore, study, understand the cultural icons provided by the study, so that you will be able to utilize them at its maximum capacity. No, there are a lot. So far, I've checked. The one in the description was 800, but I think it's more than already. Knowing that during the last 2 years, 2018 and 19, they have already identified some of our Philippine or cultural icons in the Philippines. So this integration model is very specific, but it requires pedagogical, technological, content knowledge of the teachers in the utilization of or the integration of cultural icons. Another model that speaks for the integration of technology is the what we call the SAMR model. The SAMR model represents substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. In the image, you can see here that the first two stages represents technology or serve technology as enhancement of learning. But the second stages, the modification and redefinition, now moves the technology into a more transformative tool, no, in teaching. Okay, so let's put this in context if we have to use this in our lessons. So for example, in substitution, the substitution stage, in here, technology is directly substituted for a more traditional one. So for example, if the topic is on the history and talking about constitution, then we can provide our students a sample of our Saligang Batas ng Pilipinas or our Philippine Constitution. So we teach them this is our constitution. Okay, so that's the purpose of the technology there. The cultural icon is to present to be a visual aid or an item that supports the identification of what is a constitution. Now we move on to the next stage, modification. In the augmentation. In the augmentation, the technology is again directly substituted for a traditional one, but with significant enhancement to the student's experience. So a while ago, we utilized a print copy, usually a book. No, we have a Philippine Constitution book, but this time the student, because we want to augment, no, the purpose of the cultural icon is by providing or asking the students to present an article in the Constitution with a video clip. So in here, the presentation of technology is now being augmented with the print copy is now being augmented with a video clip. Okay. Now, if we want technology to be a transformation of learning, we now move on to the next stage, which is the modification. Modification, okay, modification is now the first stage of transforming technology into a more deeper learning. So in here, for example, a while ago in the augmentation, we have added presentation of a video clip to the print constitution, Philippine Constitution. So in the augmentation, we now ask the student to present to present the to present a graphic organizer to the entire class, not just submitting the video clip, but this time is already asking the students to provide a graphic organizer that includes could be that could utilize other form of medium or cultural icons, no? And this now presents a new product or synthesis of what they have used a while ago. Okay, so an addition to a modification to what the student presented a while ago in a video clip. Now, the last and the highest form of integration is what we call the redefinition. Okay. The redefinition is the pinnacle of how technology can transform students' experience. No? So in here, students can, for example, can either do a survey or do a correspondence to other students outside our country and compare how their constitutions are being made, no? Or they can identify a particular amendment and then exchange ideas or compare how are the legalities or the mandates indicated in that particular amendment. So it's more now on redefining, no? It's now transforming knowledge into a more global perspective and with the use of what we call cultural icons. No? So we started with the Saligang Batas ng Pilipinas, which is our constitution. So this is the two last model represent specific integration or direct integration of technology in the teaching learning processes. So we have different learning processes. We have identification or analysis of students, characteristics, and outcomes, and then later comes the integration of the cultural icon. But if you have to be specific, then you can utilize the two suggested technology integration model, which are the SAMR model and the TPAC model. So the question now is, how do we use cultural icons to promote achievement of desired learning outcomes? No? So we belong to either elementary, secondary, higher education, field of profession. It is now our task to, in what way we can utilize or integrate. No? But what is important is we need to appropriately and comprehensively learn or acquire knowledge on what are or be aware of the different cultural icons available, no? And that is being provided or kept by the Sagisan ng Pilipinas. So, what does research say when it comes to culture-based education and the integration of cultural icons? No? For example, in the study of the effects of different culturally based materials on English as a foreign language, learners' reading anxiety, the study stated that, or resulted, that if teachers focus on teaching on text with culturally familiar in context to students, when teachers focus teaching on text with culturally familiar in context to students, it decreases the anxiety of learning English as a foreign language. No? Because this study, we are all aware that students learning L2, or what we call the second language, usually give students anxiety, fear, just like what Sir Sonny mentioned a while ago, especially in our colonial mentality. We believe that those who can speak well in English are the ones who are knowledgeable, no? But this study proved that if we integrate culturally familiar text or even our cultural language or our cultural icons, then learning a second language the anxiety of learning a second language can be prevented, okay? And would give us confidence to learn. So that's good for the second language learners. Another research said that if reading comprehension is enriched, no, with culturally based materials, will result to a positive effect on vocabulary knowledge and attitudes towards English lesson. And this has been also supported by the study on mother tongue based education. That if we have mastered our mother tongue based well, then it lays the foundation of learning properly and appropriately our second language, which is English. Okay. Another study talk about the culturally responsive teaching in somewhere in North America, no? And this study highlighted the benefits of utilizing culturally responsive teaching. This emphasizes, for example, in the study of brain science and education, that if drawing on learners' background knowledge shapes comprehension, so background knowledge meaning the language, the culture, the practices, the family composition, religious affiliation, and so on. This shapes comprehension, and that all learners process new information best when it is linked with what they already know. So, for example, if they are studying another religion, but if we are aware of our own religion, it's easy for us to understand other religion. A study also conducted on the significance of culturally based education in learning math, no? And this has been conducted by Meow and Reynolds in 2017. And they have recommended in their study that there is a need to incorporate culture in mathematics for the better understanding of the concepts and ideas, and to make math look realistic to primary school students who are still going through the development stage of acquiring mathematics skills and ideas. We often hear from our either children or our students, if you are married, your children, the the statement, I hate math. Why? Okay, there are factors, no, that we need to consider in learning math. Number one, it could be the pedagogy. And second, it's really putting math into our own context. No? If we are using foreign languages or foreign tools or examples, then how can these students relate and then understand better math concepts? Okay? So that's why this study is a very good study, knowing that in their recommendation, they really have strongly suggested that culture should be incorporated in teaching math. Okay. Another study on cultural icons talk about um, rethinking the cultural icon. No? And in here, they found out that the cultural icons bridge the divide between the individual and the community. Okay? With the fast pace of our um, global situation, somehow we are far from our cultural heritage or cultural knowledge, no? We are more on American. We use sometimes we use American terminologies, or what you call this expression. Okay, but it's good to really look into the importance of our own. If you remember the latest news on the way, due to pandemic, we are not allowed anymore to shake hands, but we can make use of our own way of greeting or welcoming by putting our hands on our chest. Then that would be a very good example of keeping in touch with our culture. Okay, because culture has the ability to evoke a familiar past in a new way in the present. No? And although this warrant a deeper cultural analysis, but with the study made by the organizers in keeping and reviewing and finalizing the cultural icons, we are assured that these icons really represents the Filipino culture. In summary, let us now look into simple steps in integrating cultural icons or technology in the teaching learning process, so that we will be able, or this technology can help aid or support in the acquisition of the expected outcomes of the students. Okay, so first we need to identify what type of teacher are you, no? So what is your paradigm in teaching? So you can choose any of the instructional framework or model in integrating cultural icons, no? And make sure to really understand the process, because if you don't get the entire message of the process, then somehow you might miss in between, some things in between. Second is to formulate appropriate learning outcomes. As I've said, learning outcomes also drives, no? Learning outcome drives the selection, the selection of instructional tools or the cultural icons, as well as the identification of the different teaching learning activities or learning experiences, or we call it in layman's term strategies, and at the same time the assessment task, no, or the assessment schemes. So it's very important to have a clear understanding of what are the real outcomes we want from our students. Next is to design learning activities and assessment tasks. Of course, these are dependent to the appropriateness of the learning outcomes. Implement the design learning experience, evaluate the teaching learning process, reflect What is important is we reflect and draw out insights on how to effectively integrate cultural icons or technology and provide a culturally responsive teaching learning process. With that, I would like to end my talk by quoting the message of Lev Vygotsky that language and culture are the framework through which humans experience, communicate, and understand reality. That's all, and thank you for listening.